Overtourism is destroying many of the world's most beautiful destinations. In some of these places, the number of tourists has skyrocketed into the millions. These cities are now overwhelmed by more visitors than they can handle, causing overcrowded streets and damaged landmarks. Overtourism is not just ruining the experience for travelers, it's taking a toll on the cities themselves. Streets, beaches, and cultural sites are being overrun, while prices and rents skyrocket, making life harder for the locals. In this video, we're counting down the top 10 cities that are being overwhelmed by too many visitors. 10. Barcelona, Spain. Number 10 is Barcelona, a city with a vibrant blend of art, architecture, and history. It's home to the famous works of Antoni Gaudí, including La Sagrada Familia and Park Güell, both of which draw millions of visitors each year. But for Barcelona's 1.6 million residents, overtourism has become a constant headache. With over 30 million visitors per year, the city has reached a breaking point. The influx of tourists has dramatically changed the city's neighborhoods. La Rambla, once a favorite local promenade, is now crowded with tourists, souvenir shops, and street vendors. Areas like the Gothic Quarter and Barceloneta Beach are packed year-round, leaving little space for residents to enjoy their own city. Noise pollution has become unbearable in many neighborhoods, as tourists flood the city at all hours, and rent prices have soared, with locals being priced out due to the surge in Airbnb-style accommodations. 9. Venice, Italy. At number 9, we have Venice, a city famous for its canals, gondolas, and historic architecture. Yet beneath its picturesque charm lies a city under siege by tourists. Venice receives over 25 million visitors a year, yet the city itself has only about 50,000 permanent residents. This overwhelming number of tourists puts a massive strain on the city's infrastructure, which was never designed to handle such a crowd. Streets that were once quiet and peaceful are now packed with selfie-snapping tourists, and its narrow alleys and canals become clogged with people and boats. The presence of huge cruise ships has also added to Venice's woes. These ships dock right next to the city, releasing thousands of visitors at once. The ships not only contribute to air and water pollution but also create waves that erode the city's fragile foundations. Locals are increasingly being pushed out due to skyrocketing property prices, largely driven by short-term rentals aimed at tourists. Many Venetians feel that their city is being turned into a theme park, with no regard for their daily lives or the preservation of Venice's unique cultural heritage. 8. Dubrovnik, Croatia. At number 8 is Dubrovnik, Croatia's stunning coastal city known for its medieval walls and breathtaking views of the Adriatic Sea. Once a hidden gem, Dubrovnik's fame exploded after it was featured as the fictional city of King's Landing in Game of Thrones. While this exposure brought global attention to the city, it also brought hordes of tourists, overwhelming the city's infrastructure and disrupting local life. Dubrovnik's Old Town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but the narrow streets and ancient walls weren't designed to handle the massive crowds that now flock to the city, especially during the summer months. Cruise ships regularly bring thousands of visitors at a time, and during peak season, the number of tourists inside the city walls can far exceed the number of actual residents. The heavy foot traffic is causing damage to the historic walls, and local officials have had to implement limits on how many visitors can enter the old town at any given time. The rise in tourism has also led to a sharp increase in living costs, driving many locals out. The population of Dubrovnik's Old Town has dropped significantly, as properties are increasingly converted into tourist accommodations. 7. Santorini, Greece. Santorini, coming in at number 7, is perhaps the most famous of Greece's islands, known for its iconic blue-domed churches, whitewashed buildings, and stunning sunsets. But the island's small size and limited resources make it particularly vulnerable to overtourism. Over 2 million visitors come to Santorini each year, many of whom arrive on massive cruise ships that dump thousands of people onto the island for just a few hours at a time. The population of Santorini is only around 15,000, meaning that during the peak season, tourists vastly outnumber locals. The streets of towns like Oia and Fira are often so crowded that it becomes difficult to move, and tourists scramble to get the perfect sunset photo. The island's famous beaches and cliffs are being eroded, and the once pristine environment is now polluted with plastic waste and other litter left behind by tourists. 6. Hallstatt, Austria. Number 6 is Hallstatt, a tiny Austrian village with a population of just around 800 people. Hallstatt became famous thanks to Instagram, where its picturesque lake, alpine scenery, and charming houses have been shared by influencers and tourists from around the world. This sudden rise to fame has brought a flood of tourists to Hallstatt, which now sees over 1 million visitors annually, over 100 times its resident population. For such a small village, the sheer number of tourists is overwhelming. Tour buses regularly drop off hundreds of visitors at a time, filling the narrow streets to capacity. Tourists swarm to the village's iconic viewpoints, often pushing and shoving to get the perfect photograph. This has led to increased traffic congestion and noise pollution, disturbing the once peaceful atmosphere of the town. Hallstatt's small businesses and facilities are overwhelmed, and the increase in demand for accommodation has driven up property prices, making it difficult for locals to afford to live in their own village. 5. Machu Picchu, Peru. At number 5, Machu Picchu, the ancient Incan citadel perched high in the Andes Mountains, is one of the most iconic archaeological sites in the world. It attracts over 1.5 million visitors each year, drawn by its historical significance and breathtaking views. However, the fragile ruins of Machu Picchu are suffering from the effects of overtourism. In response to these concerns, the Peruvian government has introduced restrictions on the number of daily visitors, as well as mandatory tour guides and designated routes through the site. Machu Picchu is located in a remote, mountainous region with limited resources, and the influx of tourists has led to problems with waste disposal, water pollution, and deforestation. The pressure to accommodate visitors has also contributed to the displacement of local communities, as more land is used for tourism-related development. While efforts are being made to protect Machu Picchu, the challenge of balancing preservation with the demands of tourism remains significant. 4. Bali, Indonesia. Bali, at number 4, is a tropical paradise that has become one of the world's most popular tourist destinations. Known for its beautiful beaches, lush rice terraces, and vibrant culture, Bali attracts millions of visitors every year. But the island's infrastructure is struggling to keep up with the demands of overtourism. Roads are constantly clogged with traffic, and the island's once pristine beaches are increasingly littered with plastic waste and other pollution. Bali's local communities have also been affected. The island's economy has become heavily dependent on tourism, and traditional industries like agriculture are in decline. Many local Balinese people now work in tourism, but the rise in property prices, driven by the demand for tourist accommodations, has made it difficult for them to afford to live in their own communities. Environmental degradation is another major issue. Bali's water resources are under immense pressure, with many areas experiencing water shortages. While Bali remains a top destination for travelers, the island's future depends on finding more sustainable ways to manage tourism. 3. Kyoto, Japan. At number 3, we have Kyoto, Japan's cultural heart and a city steeped in history. Kyoto is famous for its ancient temples, traditional wooden houses, serene gardens, and geisha districts, offering visitors a glimpse into Japan's past. The city has been inundated with tourists, especially during peak seasons like cherry blossom in the spring and autumn when the leaves change color. Kyoto's narrow streets, particularly in the historic Gion district, have become almost impassable due to the sheer number of visitors. Popular temples like Fushimi Inari Taisha, known for its thousands of red torii gates, and Kiyomizu-dera are packed with people from dawn to dusk. The atmosphere of peace and reflection that these locations once offered has been replaced by the constant clicking of cameras and crowded walkways. Traditional machiya houses have been converted into ghost houses, driving up property prices and forcing many locals to leave. Some Kyotoites have expressed frustration, as tourists are often unaware of or disrespectful to local customs, such as crowding quiet residential streets to spot a geisha or being loud in sacred spaces. 2. Amsterdam, Netherlands. At number 2 is Amsterdam, a city known for its picturesque canals, historic architecture, and liberal culture. However, in recent years, Amsterdam has struggled to cope with the massive influx of tourists, nearly 20 million annually in a city with a population of less than 1 million. Overtourism has turned much of the city center into a chaotic, crowded hub, causing significant strain on the city's infrastructure and quality of life for its residents. Too much noise, litter, and public intoxication are common complaints from residents, many of whom feel that their city has become a Disneyland for adults. The local government has started cracking down on nuisance tourism, closing some of the red light windows and introducing restrictions on new hotel developments. However, these measures have yet to significantly curb the flood of tourists into the city's iconic areas. Popular areas like the Jordan district, once quiet and residential, are now packed with tourists, making it difficult for locals to enjoy their own neighborhoods. Amsterdam's canals, which are one of its biggest attractions, are also suffering from overcrowding, with tour boats clogging the waterways and blocking them. 1. Prague, Czech Republic. And finally, at number 1, we have Prague, a city that has seen a dramatic transformation in recent years due to overtourism. Prague's fairy-tale-like streets, stunning Gothic architecture, and historic landmarks such as Charles Bridge and Prague Castle have long made it one of Europe's most beautiful cities. But in recent years, its old-world charm has been overshadowed by massive crowds, especially in the city center. Millions of visitors flock to Prague every year, turning its cobblestone streets into a crush of people, particularly around tourist hotspots. The old town square is now so crowded that it's nearly impossible to walk through peacefully. The rise in popularity of cheap flights, along with Prague's relatively low prices compared to other European capitals, has made it a favorite destination for weekend travelers, especially large groups seeking a party atmosphere. Entire neighborhoods in Prague's historic center have been transformed into tourist-only zones, with locals being priced out of the housing market. Property prices have skyrocketed, and many families have been forced to move to the outskirts. Prague's rich history and cultural heritage are now at risk of being lost under the weight of overtourism, making it a prime example of a city at breaking point.